Welcome to another episode of the Swamp247 Podcast. I'm your host, Graham Hall, joined once again by my co-host, Jacob Rudner, and it has officially been 9 days of fall camp. The Gators have already practiced 7 times. If you've missed our daily content over at Swamp247, I implore you to go check it out, where we list who's been available, what we're hearing, what we're seeing, a lot of VIP content up there as well. Always a ton of recruiting coverage as well from Blake Alderman. Don't want to miss out, but we're going to talk about maybe the biggest news that has come out of fall camp here today. That is the injury to Montrell Johnson Jr. He practiced for the first time last Wednesday with the Gators, but then was noticeably absent, and it soon became apparent as to why. He suffered a minor, as Billy Napier said, very minor knee injury that did require it to be scoped out and him to have an arthroscopic knee procedure on it. And the Gators are listing him as week to week. Now, he is back on his feet and on the practice field. We've seen him out there, but he is not participating, of course. And there really hasn't been a timeline given for when he's going to return. Billy Napier made it clear that they are taking things at Johnson's pace. Now, whether he's going to be available for that season opener in 22 days, we record this on Friday early afternoon before Florida's 8th practice of fall camp a little bit later this afternoon. But whether he's going to be available for that Miami game remains to be seen, which puts a lot of the onus on those young guys, Trayon Webb, KD Daniels, Jaden Baugh. And Billy Napier, I think he's a realist in a sense. He's not always going to kind of give you what he actually thinks, but also not be overly negative. And he did say that the injury to Johnson maybe was a little bit of a bright side in a sense that it's going to give these younger guys additional reps throughout fall camp, and that it happened when it did early on. So he actually has a chance of making an early season return. Jacob, I think that you are in agreement with me, though, that losing your leading rusher for the past 2 seasons in Montrell Johnson Jr. is an absolute significant blow to Florida, a team that is looking to have production on the ground. And Napier historically has been a guy who's going to run the football about 60% of the time. But what have you heard regarding Johnson's injury, and what does this put on some of the younger guys, as well as, Jacoby Jackson, who we've heard some good things about dating back to spring camp?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think it's important to touch on that we don't know exactly when Montrell Johnson is going to be back, but everybody who we've talked to, be it Billy Napier in a press conference setting or some conversations that I've had, behind the scenes a little bit with people who are close to the situation and know what's going on, it has been stressed to me multiple times and from multiple people that this is not a big deal. This is not expected to hold Montrell Johnson out for a long period of time. If he misses the Miami game, that wouldn't be surprising to a lot of the folks who I've talked to about this, but at the same time, it also really wouldn't shock them if he's back and able to play for that. We've seen him walking around the Florida practice fields already without a limp. He doesn't have any visible rehab equipment like a brace, no wrap on his knee that we can see. So the signs that Montrell Johnson is in a decent spot are there. I don't know that that's going to translate to him being ready for Miami, like I said, but it certainly is going to give him a chance. As far as having guys behind them, I do feel and have felt for a long time that Florida is probably best suited to handle an injury at running back, if at no other position. They have a lot of confidence in Trayon Webb. You mentioned Jacoby Jackson. He's somebody who I've heard a lot of good things about dating back to the spring for his performances in practices, both as a running back and as a returner on special teams. Jaden Baugh, the freshman, has made a lot of noise, had a great spring game ever since. I think has kind of started to emerge as somebody who looks like a very formidable future full-service back, and in the short term, somebody who could probably step in and take a part of that workload as long as Montrell Johnson is out. I would anticipate, all 3 of those guys, Webb, Jackson, and Baugh, to play some role throughout the 2024 season, even when Montrell Johnson is healthy. So this is a good room. I don't really have a whole bunch of concern, especially seeing as this is supposed to be a short-term injury for Montrell Johnson. If it stays that way, which, as you and I know, that doesn't always stay that way, and there's always a chance that things take longer than are prescribed, and it all comes down to how the rehab process goes. But if it stays on timeline, this is not really something that I'm terribly concerned about. It will impact Florida in the Miami game if he's not able to play in it. Montrell Johnson is obviously Florida's best running back, and it's by a pretty wide margin. So, does the unit take a step back? Yes, if Montrell Johnson is not there. Am I concerned about the situation for Florida at the position overall, though? As we look at the season as a whole, no, I'm not. I believe that they're going to get Johnson back relatively soon. I think it's even possible he plays in the Miami game. And if not, they do have the depth to be able to stomach that loss for one game.
Yeah, you get Treyon Webb back, a guy who was able to rush 100 for 150 yards last year, get 2 touchdowns. Clearly their most productive back behind Johnson, but again, just a second-year guy who has some things he needs to continue working on, improving as a pass catcher out of the backfield. Pass pro is certainly, I think, a question that you wrote about a little bit more over at Swamp247 if VIP subscribers want to check that out. That is certainly a question for an offensive line that has struggled to protect the quarterback dating back to last season. That is going to be a factor, how those guys fare there. As Billy Napier noted when he was discussing Montrell Johnson's injury on Wednesday, he did say that it's more than just about rushing the football. It's about pass protection, knowing your assignment, what to do, obviously confidence out there as well. So there is a lot of, that goes into this position more than just running down the field here, and getting those younger guys, especially the underclassmen, to be ready for that workload and the responsibilities is going to be something we're going to be following throughout fall camp. Now, the running back position wasn't the only one that appeared to be a little bit of a question mark when it came to injuries. Earlier in the week, when we went out there for practice, a handful of guys in Florida's secondary were in black non-contact jerseys. Asa Turner, Jakeem Jackson as well, the second-year corner who had a pretty impressive spring from everything that we heard. Cormani McLean, we were told he was out there at practice in a black non-contact jersey. We did not see him the past couple of days, and that's certainly something that people have been watching for, seeing how he fares in fall camp, knowing it's going to be critical for him moving forward to continue improving and verifying the decision for Florida to bring him in here. But the most, I think, notable one was that Devin Moore, whose health has really been under the microscope for his first 2 seasons at Florida, graded out as Florida's top defensive player last year, even though he only played in 7 games and had 1/3 the snap count of Jason Marshall Jr. there at cornerback. That's a guy that they can't afford to lose. And Jason Marshall last week said, fortunately, he's healthy. He has a chance to be a first-round guy, and he needs to stay healthy. Fortunately, according to Billy Napier, it doesn't appear to be a significant injury for Devin Moore, not a physical injury. He's dealing with an abscess tonsil. Jakeem Jackson is dealing with a soft tissue lower body injury, and he'll be back imminently, according to Napier. While Asa Turner, we saw him out there yesterday at practice for Florida and back in his regular jersey, and Napier said he's just dealing with a little bit of a banged up shoulder. So that is, I think, some fortunate good of injury news for the Gators at a position that they can't afford to lose guys, because as you and I have written about a lot at Swamp247, the secondary is absolutely a unit that needs to take a step forward this year, and clearly they're going to need to stay healthy moving forward. Also a pair of offensive linemen that Florida young guys are dealing with some injuries, and Caden Jones and Fletcher Westfall is dealing with mononucleosis. So you can read all that injury news again over at Swamp247. But outside of Johnson, after 1 week of fall camp, it looks like Florida has avoided any major injuries, which I do, and this is something I want your take on. I do think it speaks to everything we've heard about the strength and conditioning program from Tyler Miles, the importance of injury recovery, building strength throughout the offseason and into fall camp. You can't have guys like, Justice Boone, Cam Carroll suffering season-ending knee injuries in that first week of camp, because this is a team that has, I think, a small margin of error. And the healthier that they're going to be when that season opener arrives, that's going to directly play into Florida's competitive chances in my mind. Like you said, they're going to need to continue staying healthy, and you can't afford any major injuries or setbacks with guys like Johnson. So that was one of my big takeaways from the first week of fall camp. But certainly in the secondary, anytime you hear an injury there from one of those guys, I think a lot of people are kind of holding their breath and waiting to see how serious it is.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on a couple important things there. One, I think just in general, Florida's health has been a noticeable benefit this offseason so far. I just think back to last fall camp, and we were, I think, every day reporting on a new player in a non-contact jersey, a new player who was working out with Florida's rehab group off to the side. And so there were a host of minor ailments, bumps and bruises last fall that obviously have an impact. I mean, whenever a guy is limited in his availability, he can't practice fully. So it hurts the team. It hurts the individual development. And this preseason, we haven't really seen that. So just generally speaking, I would say that there are signs that, be it a strength and conditioning thing or a rehab thing. Billy Napier, I found this interesting, mentioned that Florida's players are no longer allowed to take their phones into the rehab room where they go and get treatment. They have to leave their phone at the door. How much that's keeping them healthy, I don't know. Probably not too much. But does it help a guy focus on his recovery and put a better effort into the treatment he's giving and paying better attention to the advice he's maybe receiving? Sure. And so I think that they have clearly taken a step forward in that regard. And then as far as the secondary goes, some guys who are banged up, but it doesn't sound too serious. Devin Moore, who has had a host of health issues over the last couple of years, has a tonsil problem, as you said, and it doesn't sound like that's going to be something that limits him. I do want to be clear, all three of the guys you mentioned, Devin Moore, Jakeem Jackson, and Asa Turner, were in full participant jerseys, and they appeared to be going through drills fully when we last saw them. That was Thursday, August 8th. We're recording this on August 9th. And so not terribly concerned about that. I do anticipate Devin Moore being available for the start of the season, despite this abscess tonsil. And he is somebody who I think is going to play a really important role. I've heard that he is on track to potentially compete to be a starter alongside Jason Marshall. And there are a lot of people who have high expectations for him. So just generally speaking, yes, Florida is healthy. Montrell Johnson is the only major guy right now who I think factors into that two deep who's hurt. You mentioned Caden Jones and Fletcher Westfall. Those guys are, of course, important, but not guys who I anticipate factoring into the two deep at least right away. So as far as major contributors go, I would say either healthy or very close to it.
Yeah, I just got to give my unprofessional medical opinion here. Go ahead and get those tonsils out, man. I mean, that is absolutely something. It's a brutal surgery. It was a brutal recovery when I had it back in college. It's not fun whatsoever. Maybe this isn't the ideal time for a guy like Devin Moore to be getting his tonsils out, but you hear abscess tonsil, and that just kind of makes me cringe a little bit. So hopefully it's something that is not too serious for him. Like you said, he's already back on the practice field, but a guy who just seems to not be able to really catch a break when it comes to his injuries, not even just the physical ones. We know that he's dealt with some ailments like this before that have hindered his ability to be out there on the field. So hopefully this is the last one for him, knock on wood, because you hate to see a guy like that who clearly has a ton of potential and has performed every time he's been out there on the field, that he keeps having these setbacks, relatively minor ones, fortunately for him, but it can't impact your ability to be on the field, because Florida is clearly going to need him to start at cornerback, most likely when the season opens. I mentioned Justice Boone. That is someone who his return to the football field has been highly awaited, dating back to last year when he suffered that significant knee injury, worked his way back throughout spring camp, and now he's competing with Tyreek Sapp at that F position there, a guy that they moved over last year to the F spot and shuffled around. Princely Umenmielen moved him to the jack linebacker spot when Justice Boone actually initially went down with his injury. Now you're having some competition there at that edge room, which that kind of, surprised me a little bit. I'll be quite honest, and I want to get your take on this, but I've told people that I thought that the most competitive room at Florida was the wide receiver room. And we've also written about, which again, you can read more of this over at Swamp247. We've written about position battles regarding the offensive line too. But Billy Napier made it quite clear on Wednesday that he believes the edge position room is the most competitive one at Florida. And you would think that guys like Tyreek Sapp and Justice Boone are battling out there for playing time. But as Tyreek Sapp said the other night, every time one of them is out there, they feel good for the other one. They're that close as friends. This could be a rotation, regardless of who ends up starting the first snap for Florida. But it's clearly one that Florida feels very high on. You also have, George Gums there, who has had a great offseason, relatively new to that position as well. A guy who started his career at Northern Illinois on the offensive side of the ball before playing defense last year. Of course, LJ McCray, very highly, touted, and his freshman season is really highly anticipated by not just people in Florida, but people who projected him as a 5-star player. So I was a little bit surprised to hear Napier say that he thinks that's the most competitive room. But also when you look at the roster and you look at how those guys have done behind Boone and Sapp, it does make a lot of sense. And it seems like that could be a position of strength for the Gators this season.
Yeah, certainly. And it doesn't really surprise me to hear Napier say that, because I think that, like running back on offense, this is a room that's deep. It has a lot of talented players who are options to see the field, be it as a starter or in some sort of a rotation, which is what I'm anticipating. You mentioned Tyreek Sapp and Justice Boone. I'll throw in George Gums as somebody who's made a lot of noise so far in camp and kind of attracted some attention. Jack Pyburn is somebody who I think can play a little bit of a versatile role on the defensive line, potentially even that F position after he had a knee surgery last year. Florida has been impressed with his speedy recovery and just his dedication to getting back out onto the field. And there are others too. So it doesn't surprise me. And I think that Florida does have an opportunity to generate more pressure and to be sound in pass coverage from that position, that F spot this season, which is going to be really important. Last year, Florida did not do a great job in attacking opposing quarterbacks. They ranked number 72 in FBS games in sack percentage, which is a number that just won't work. It's part of their problem when it came to generating turnovers. Billy Napier has talked about having an effective pass rush will go hand in hand with being able to have an effective secondary that's going to generate more than just 3 interceptions, which is what it had last year. And this F position, which, like you've said, is very talented, will play a role in that. And I have some confidence in guys like Tyreek Sapp and Justice Boone, who are, very close and they're competitors, but they are pushing each other to be better. And I think that that's healthy. So, maybe this is the best position group, like F. This is the best spot on the defense at the moment in terms of its depth and talent. It also might be the healthiest that the position group has been under Napier just in general over the course of the last 3 years. I look forward to seeing exactly what that translates to when it comes to game time, because it is, at the end of the day, a lot of players who we've already seen before. So Florida is counting on progress from guys who we kind of know what they're going to bring to the table, as opposed to a whole bunch of new faces who are going to, shake up the rotation and bring some new skill sets to the table. It's a lot of bringing guys back, but be it guys like Justice Boone, who are healthy now and now have an opportunity to make an impact again, or Tyreek Sapp, who's in his 4th year at the college level, more experienced, stronger, smarter, and more capable of being able to impact that way, I think is intriguing. So this is a good room. I think that it's good that they have competition, and there are a lot of standout guys there. And I would agree with what you said a second ago. I was glad you mentioned it, that I don't think it's a matter of this is the starter, this is the backup, this is the 3rd string guy. I see a room that is going to rely on rotation, that will capitalize on its depth and its talent, and will put a number of guys out there to try and be as effective as possible.
Yeah, I could also see Florida rotating at wide receiver, especially. Billy Napier said that if the first 3 guys that are going to be out there, if the season were to start today, at wide receiver would be Eugene Wilson, Chimere Dike, and Khalil Jackson. But, you have Elijah Badger there as well, Aiden Mizell, Andy Jean competing as well, Tank Hawkins, TJ Abrams, Marcus Burke, Jaquavion Fraziers. I mean, I just rattled off nearly 10 guys right there that are making a case to be on the field this year. So certainly competition is healthy at Florida. We talked last week, though, about a position, and I'm not going to dive too much into it to wrap up this episode, but we spoke a little bit last week about the offensive line and how Florida is still evaluating some options and there's still competition there. And it's something that Jake Slaughter said last week, that there's a lot of competition along the offensive line, not just for those starting roles, but for guys who are looking to see the field in a rotational capacity, even be on there for special teams, prove that they can, be the next guys up in that room. But what have you heard, just briefly? If you want to hear more of Jacob's thoughts and read what he has said and what he's heard, go to swamp247.com and read his VIP story on the offensive line. A really good read, very informative. But what have you heard, just briefly, in terms of how that offensive line competition is progressing throughout the first 8 practices, heading into the 8th practice of fall camp now?
Yeah, before I say anything, I would definitely encourage anybody listening to this who wants more information to go on over to swamp247.com. Subscribe, which, we've got a great deal going on right now. Subscribe and go check that out, because at the end of the day, and we've said this on the podcast before, we're going to try and inform you guys as much as we can on the podcast, but all of our information is on the site. And whether that's on our message board or in stories, that is where the most information is going to appear. It's a daily thing. It's constantly coming out. And so if you want to be really in the loop, that's where you go to do it. That being said, I said this on the podcast last time, much to the chagrin of our listeners, and I'm going to reiterate it this time. I don't think it's a good thing that there is as much competition as there seems to be along Florida's offensive line. And I'll tell you why. I have concerns about Florida's right guard position. Damian George last year was a problem at right tackle. His performances were routinely subpar, and that's not just my opinion. That's, in the opinion of other experts, draft analysts type people. That's in the opinion of places like PFF that give out game grades for individual players. Damian George was routinely on the wrong side of those grades. And he thinks, and I would tend to agree, that a move to right guard is something that will benefit him over the course of this upcoming season. I still think that's true, but the amount that he would need to improve relative to his performance last year is very significant. And I don't think that I've seen, nor have I heard anything that has indicated that he's taken that sizable of a leap. Has there been improvement? Is he more comfortable? Possibly, which is good, but it's clearly not been enough to convince Florida that that is the clear-cut starter at the position. And so then it's opened the door for guys like Cameron Waits, who hasn't really been able to stay on the field consistently since he joined the Gators due to injuries, and it's by no fault of his own, but it's just the reality. I also view Cameron Waits as a guy who's kind of stuck in between positions. We've seen him play tackle at times. We've seen him play guard at times. I don't know that Florida's really figured out where it wants him to stick. We were just at practice on Thursday, and he played both positions again. So he seems to still be preparing for either a swing role as Florida's sixth offensive lineman or potentially to take over one of the two spots on the right side, be it George's spot at guard or Brandon Crenshaw-Dixon's spot at tackle. And one thing I said when Florida took a commitment from Crenshaw-Dixon, this was way back in the winter, was I was concerned and remain concerned that a guy who was good in the Mountain West would struggle potentially with the game speed and being able to have the footwork and the strength to contend with SEC caliber players. It is a totally different ball game. And again, just to reiterate, that is not to say that Brandon Crenshaw-Dixon is not good or maybe even very good, but he clearly has not proven it yet because we are still seeing this rotation on Florida's right side of the line. Cameron Waits, like I said, is getting reps at the position, and nobody has really locked it down. So there's always two ways to look at competition. I would say something kind of a similar sentiment with wide receiver. It's on one hand, competition is a good thing. At the F position is a great example. I think Florida's F position is stacked with talent, and the fact that there's competition there really speaks to that. But then there are other positions where competition is not such a good thing, and that's offensive line to me, and maybe even wide receiver. I think that it's great, again, that guys like Tank Hawkins and Andy Jean and Aiden Mizell are starting to emerge. But Florida went into the transfer portal and scooped out a guy like Elijah Badger, who's a senior with over 1,000 yards of receiving in a very poor offensive situation at Arizona State over the last 2 years. The guy has shown himself as a talented player, and we haven't really seen him be able to lock down a spot yet. So is it competition as a byproduct of underwhelming performances, or is it a competition as a byproduct of a lot of talent? And so that's where my biggest question is as we get into the second third of Florida's fall camp. They have their first scrimmage a day after you and I are recording this, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this on the next episode of our podcast. But those are the questions I have. Whether or not these competitions are a healthy thing or they are warning signs that there could be some struggle ahead for a couple players who just haven't done enough to be able to lock down a spot yet.
Yeah, it's certainly something we're going to continue to monitor throughout fall camp because it is critical for Florida's success this season. Just knowing that Graham Mertz took more than 30 sacks last year, and that pocket didn't give him enough time a lot of the time to be able to throw downfield, and creating more explosive passes is certainly going to be a key for this Florida offense. So we'll be out there at practice in a couple of hours here in the Florida sun. So stay tuned to Swamp247 for constant updates. We'll also be talking to a handful of players, I believe 6 players today, regarding their thoughts on the start of fall camp. And then also this weekend, make sure you are plugged in and stay tuned to Swamp247 because Florida will be holding its first scrimmage of fall camp on Saturday afternoon. We'll have updates from that afterwards, most likely some VIP notes for subscribers to check out. And we'll be back next week for another episode here of the Swamp 247 podcast. But that's going to do it for us today. For Jacob Rudner, I'm Graham Hall. We'll see you next time.